Hey guys, it's Maddie and today I'll be sharing with you the books that I read in July. So I read 4 books in July. I wanted to make my goal to read a lot of books this month. Then stuff happened, slumps happened, life happened, and that didn't happen. So I'm so glad I read 4 books, but I know I could have done better. And I did DNF one of those books. Altogether, I read 1,020 pages, so not too bad. At least I read over 1,000 pages this month. One of those books was published in 1958. One was published in 2006. One was published in 2015. And one was published in 2017. So all the books I read were published in different years. I am glad though that I read one 2017 debut. I read 2 4-star books, one 4.75-star book, which is a first, and one 5-star book. One of those books was a children's book, one was a fantasy, and 2 were contemporaries. And I read 1 children's book and 3 YA books. One of those books was a reread, and 3 of the books were written by females and 1 was written by a male. Out of all of the 8 books that were on my original TBR for July, I read 3 out of those, so not too good, but I also only read 4 books this month, so it was kind of a given that that was going to happen. And one of the books that I read in July was not on my original TBR. And I participated in 2 readathons this month. One of them was the Booktubeathon, and the other was the biannual Bibliothon. I also want to quickly give credit to Books and Lala. She was my inspiration for the idea to do the statistics. So I want to give the credit to her because I did not come up with that idea. So I will also link her channel in somewhere on the video, probably in the cards if you want to check out her channel. So without further ado, let's just go into the books that I read in July. So the first book I read is a children's book, and I don't read children's books very often, but this was a very cute and quick read, and that is The Velveteen Rabbit by Marjorie Williams. I almost forgot the author, I think that's her name. And I read this book because it was mentioned in the book The Problem with Forever by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and I absolutely loved that book so much. And I actually didn't know The Velveteen Rabbit was an actual book, but I was curious because it was mentioned so many times in The Problem with Forever, so I ended up getting it from the library, and I read it in one sitting. It probably took like a half hour to read. It was so short, obviously, but it was so cute. It's about this rabbit who it's a toy rabbit, but he wants to become a real rabbit, and it's his journey throughout that. It was so cute, so enjoyable. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. The reason being is because it's a children's book. I don't really feel like I can give a children's book 5 out of 5 stars just because I'm past that age of reading children's books, but it was a great book. It was really enjoyable. I'd recommend it to kids of all ages, adults of all ages. It really has a great theme in it that I absolutely loved. Next, I read An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir. This is one I really liked. I had a lot of mixed feelings about it, but I really liked it. It's the only fantasy book I read this month, and I tend to read a lot more fantasy nowadays, but I wasn't really in the mood for a fantasy book this month, like most of it. So this is the only one. This book is about a slave named Laia, and she lives in this world of the Empire, and it takes place in ancient Rome, and her brother ends up being taken away for a crime he did, and so she sets off on this journey to go find him. And this book is also told in the perspective of another character named Elias, who is the soldier in the Empire's army, even though he doesn't really want to be. He wants to escape the Empire, and it's about these 2 characters' paths crossing and them helping each other out with gaining their freedom from the Empire. This was a great book. It had a lot of great moments in it. I loved the friendships that happened, the relationships. I think there were a lot of good female friendships and guy friendships throughout it. And this book was so brutal. It's actually kind of scary because it takes place in ancient Rome, and that's a time when everything was just so brutal and just really terrifying. And this book really captured the essence of that time period. The downfalls of this book, I felt like were some parts of the world building weren't great. I think it could have been more expanded on. I also didn't care for a lot of the romance in this book, which is unusual because, like I always say, I'm such a big fan of romance, but I think one of the romance plot points in this book was not well developed whatsoever, and it really bothered me, and I just was like really just like, no, when it happened, because it could have been developed so much more, and it just happened so suddenly. But I did like another romance in this book a lot better, but I don't think it'll be really touched on throughout the rest of the books. I hope it will, but the one that's kind of canon right now I'm not loving. I felt like I would have loved it had it been developed better. It just wasn't, so that really let me down. But other than that, I loved everything else about this book. I'm looking forward to reading the sequel in August. I'm definitely going to, and hopefully it'll be better than the first book as far as the romance goes. I hope it'll be developed more. Even though I know the romance isn't a big major thing about this book, it's mostly about this journey that the characters are going through. But I hope that aspect will be developed more because it was really developed so poorly in the first book. It like got on my nerves. And I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. So after I read An Ember in the Ashes, I went through this really bad reading slump. And this reading slump happened at the time of the booktubeathon, like the first 2 days. And it was like torture because I'm like, oh, I hated it because during the booktubeathon I always want to read as much as I can, and the first 2 days were just so bad. But on the 3rd day, I finally decided to reread a book because usually rereading a book will get me out of a reading slump. So I decided to ignore my set TBR for the booktubeathon and just read a reread. And that was Looking for Alaska by John Green. This is one of my favorite books of all time. I've read it twice. Now I've read it 3 times since I read it this month. And it had been, I think, like 2 years since I read this last. So I was really curious if my feelings were going to change on it. And some feelings did actually change. Going on to the summary of this book first, though. This book is about a boy who is named Miles, but his nickname is Pudge. And he transfers to a boarding school his junior year. And there he meets a bunch of new people who are kind of the bad crowd. He gets involved in smoking and drinking and other things that are not good. And he also meets this girl named Alaska who he gets really fascinated by, and he wants to know more about her and kind of falls in love with her, develops a little crush. And then something happens towards the end of the book that changes everything. So like I said, this is one of my favorite books. I've now read it 3 times. I mean, I can't remember any books that I've read more than 2 times. I haven't even read The Hunger Games that many times, and I love this. I love that book. So that's saying something. But I did, while rereading this, fascinatingly, if that's even a word, I did find some parts in it that I saw were problems. And the first 2 times I read this book, I didn't see any problems with it whatsoever because I loved it so much. I'm like, this book is perfect. But I did, this time reading it, find some problem points in it. First of all, one of them is using a character as a plot device, which usually is never really a good thing. I don't really like that in books, and I kind of noticed that in this book. I also noticed that Miles is way too infatuated with Alaska, and he barely knows her, and that kind of bothered me too. And just a bunch of other things that I never noticed before that are actually pretty big problems, and made me see why a lot of people actually don't like this book. Like, I understand it now. But that being said, I still love this book. I still would give it a 5 out of 5 stars. I think this book will always remain a favorite of mine, regardless of the problems I see in it now, just because it's one of the most inspirational books I've ever read. It's really just impacted my thinking on things. It's made me want to, as Miles put it, kind of search for that great perhaps of like going out there and just searching for something that can impact your life so well. And I really like how Miles really grew in this book. I think his character development is just so different from the beginning of the book, and I love that. I think the character development in this book is one of its very best points in it. And yeah, I just think I'll always love this book, and I'll always want to reread it just because it's just so great. And I'm really glad I got to reread it this month. And the last books I read, I just finished this last night. It was one of my favorite books I read this month. It was so much fun and just so great and cute. And that is Geekerella by Ashley Poston. So this is the second book I read during the booktubeathon. This is one of the books that I plan to read during the booktubeathon. And I absolutely loved it. This book is about a girl named Elle, and she is wanting to enter this contest. And it is a cosplay contest at this convention. And this contest is being sponsored by the producers of her favorite TV show, which is Starfield. And so she goes as this character from her favorite TV show, which is that show. And this book is also told in dual perspective. The other character is Darian, and he is a famous actor who is playing the lead role in the reboot of this TV show. And him and Elle eventually cross paths, and their stories start to intertwine in a way. As I said, this book was just so cute. I loved it so much. I actually knew going into this book that I was going to like it because it was totally on my alley. It's a retelling of Cinderella. At first I thought the retelling part was really loose, but it actually goes really by the book of Cinderella, especially towards the end, which I really loved. I also loved the characters. I loved Elle. She is just your typical fangirl, and I like that because she is so relatable in that way. And I love how this book is just all about fandom and like the beauty of it and how people come together because of TV shows and movies and books and being fans of them and how those fans come together, and it's so real, and I really love that. It's just so relatable. I also loved Darian, who is the actor in this book. He is someone who pretty much the whole Starfield fandom hates that he's playing the lead role in the reboot because he plays a character in this other TV show, which is more of like a teenage girl TV show, so they see him more as a heartthrob and can't really picture him as the lead role in such a serious and really big sci-fi show. So he gets a lot of hate, but he's always wanted to play this role, and it's kind of hard on him because a lot of people think he can't do it and that he's a fake fan. He's only doing it for the money, but he's actually a huge fan of Starfield, and he was so real despite the fact that he's a celebrity. It makes me wonder if celebrities are really as they seem on TV or on camera, because Darian was just so real and just different than he is on TV, and I really enjoyed his character. Overall, I love this book. I'd highly recommend it. I gave it 4.75 stars, which I never give a book 4.75 stars, but it was so close. I was so close to giving this book a 5 stars, but there was just one thing about it where someone got over something way too quickly, and that really bothered me, and it wasn't realistic, so I just felt like I couldn't give it a full 5 stars because of that, but it was so close, and I definitely want to buy this book because this is a library copy, but I want to own it because I know I'll reread it again. And it was so, so great. Highly would recommend it if you're into contemporaries and retellings because it was fantastic. So those were all the books I read in July. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below for more bookish related videos.